health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of three. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you're notified every week with my new podcasts on Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you haven't already, join my free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health, and you will be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your journey in addition to truly taking control of your health. My goal is to reach everyone on earth with eyes to see and ears to hear my message of healing. So help me with that goal. Share this podcast with a few of your friends who may need my help, especially this one, as we are talking about navigating the youth mental health issues, which is truly the pandemic. And we've got Even Transue here. He is the host of the Health Detective podcast and owner of Bucks County Light Therapy and Functional Medicine Center. He graduated from Functional Diagnostic Nutrition in 2017, and he has suffered from a variety of health challenges, but we're going to have him explain. Welcome, Even. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to get connected again.
I'm super excited about this topic. And for all of you guys listening, I will be releasing at the end of the week my hot topic on liver concerns with fatty liver with our kids. And so this week is all about our kids. We're going to be talking about mental health issues. And I'm a mom of three. My kids were born in 2002, 2004, 2006. I've seen it. I've seen this explosion of mental health issues, and it's affecting the normal kid that should not be affected. And it's a topic that I just am so passionate about as a mom because I've seen it in my own house. And as a mom, there's nothing worse. You will trade anything you can to take on the pain of your child when they're suffering. And when they fall and they bruise themselves, you know they're going to get up and they're going to be fine. But when it's a mental health issue, it's navigating uncharted territory. So super excited about this topic. And Even, I'm super excited to have you on to get through it. But why don't you start by telling us why you got so passionate about this and about your journey?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. It was really before the whole COVID thing. And I feel like that almost needs to be specified every time because not that it's a bad thing, but so many people came out to help during the last several years, which God bless them. That wasn't what I was doing. It just happened to be very timely. I actually got into this about 9-10 years ago now after starting to discover some resolutions to my own mental health challenges. And Sara and I were talking off air. One of the things that was kind of strange for me, and I'm sure many other people were dealing with it but didn't know, when I was in school, so again, 28 now, we're going back 15 years, and just thinking about the mental health stigma that was there at that time, it was obviously a lot different than it is today, and it's still not perfect today. I was dealing with these symptoms, but we didn't talk about this in school. If I recall, I had like one drug talk in high school and one suicide talk in high school. Very important. I'm glad we did that. But we didn't have the curriculum yet or the stuff going on that talked about, okay, this is what a panic attack is. This is how major depressive disorder can present itself. And so I was really dealing with these things, genuinely believing, even as what I believe is a relatively intelligent person. I like to believe that, at least. I think we all do. I believed genuinely that I was crazy. I thought something was inherently wrong with me. It can't be fixed. I did not know that these were health conditions. And so I had a variety of experiences happen. I'm not sure if we will touch on those today. No worries either way. But basically, some very powerful moments occurred at late 17 years old and into 18 years old that led me to realizing, okay, not only do I need to make a change, but thankfully I started to discover some things that got me moving in the right direction. And it made me start to realize that not for everyone, But for me personally, and I do believe millions of others out there, my mental health issues were actually more a health issue than anything. And we treat health issues differently than we treat mental health issues, even in the functional medicine space, generally speaking. So that's kind of the summary of how I got into this. Once you get better and you start feeling better, it is super natural, as both of us know, in the natural health space to want to go share this with others. It's like almost feels as if you can't go do any other work.
Absolutely. I've always said that every challenge I've come across and overcome with the health of my children or me is such a God thing. And I've connected it to literally changing the lives of other people and the feedback they get from my story and what I've come up with solutions. I tell my kids now, after my son overcame leukemia through natural supplements, including the accelerated silver, and I've talked about that, then I've overcome, mental health issues with my children. High school's mean, you guys. Girls are mean. I don't know about the boys, but the girls are mean. And I remember sitting there with my daughter at the age of 16 saying, I don't know what God's doing with this, but the strength and the muscles and the mental muscles that you're going to get through this is going to blow you away. And you are going to take that and it is going to serve you and serve others in the future. And if I had a couple hours here right now to lay out how that story has played out, it is so beautiful. And she wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And even for myself, any mental issues that I've gone through, it's only been the seeds to help me grow intrinsically and be able to strengthen those muscles that I needed for future things. And it's just like with your physical body, you need to strengthen certain muscles. With your spiritual and your mental body, you need to strengthen certain muscles to overcome things. But I want to hear about your story. Okay. What happened when you were about 17 years old and
yeah.
What did you learn?
So at that point, I had been dealing with mental health symptoms actively for 12 years. They started at 5 years old for me, and almost, for lack of a better word, interestingly, the mental health symptoms started as panic attacks. I don't remember being like generally anxious. I think I was a nervous kid, but it wouldn't have met diagnostic criteria. And so it was really panic attacks that were my first mental health symptom. And just to be clear for those listening, because this will kind of matter later, 2-parent household, great parents. We weren't rich. We'd have BMWs in the freaking parking lot, but I had food. I had a good house. I was safe. I mean, there really wasn't anything environmental wise that you would say would cause mental health issues, let alone legitimate panic attacks. And we went to the doctor at 5. And the reason I'm mentioning the 5-year-old thing for the 17-year-old answer is because the reason that those 12 years were so bad is what happened at 5. I went into this doctor's office with my parents, and I don't think I remember much of anything else at 5, but I still remember this. We went in for the symptoms I was dealing with. My parents had no idea what panic attacks were. It's not a common phrase, I don't think now, but it definitely wasn't the common phrase 23 years ago. And when we went into that doctor's office, well-meaning guy, still know him to this day, he actually told us this wasn't something to worry about. Evan gets himself a little too worked up and he's going to outgrow this. I do not think he was saying that about panic attacks. I'm thinking that he didn't realize it was a panic attack, because people don't get this. Stigma doesn't just affect the lay person like us. It also affects the doctors, right? If they're expecting every other person to come in with anxiety and depression, they're going to be looking for that. It is not a statistical norm 23 years ago for a 5-year-old with a good household to be coming in with panic attacks. It actually doesn't make sense. So 12 years go on, and I would say I was stable enough from about 5 to maybe 9th grade. So what does that put you? 13, 14 years old, roughly. And I could keep up with the grades. I could put a show on at school where I seemed normal enough. But after that is when it got bad. The panic attacks went from these random things that happened every now and then to legitimate panic disorder. I remember the night it happened. It was just one panic attack too many, I guess, and it led to panic disorder. So every day I'm now dealing with these things. There was always a fear about, oh, I can't go here, or I can't do this. I shouldn't leave the house. For those that don't know, panic disorder is kind of characterized by your entire life becomes this almost an obsession with fearing the next panic attack, only for it to inevitably happen anyway. That's when I started turning to drugs. Because very shortly after that, I would almost say within that few month time frame where I was dealing with panic attacks multiple times every single day, never getting a break, depression kicked in. Also very common transition for people to have anxiety disorders and then get depression afterwards. Of course, can happen other ways, but that's very typical clinically. The depression really changed me. That's when the drugs came in. That's when the negative coping mechanisms came in. And that's when I could no longer hide from the outside world in the way that I had been. I couldn't keep up with the grades. The grades went to failing from someone who used to be straight A's. I became very mean to the people in my life. I was the most mean to myself, but I was terrible to the people around me as well. You really get this, at least it seems this way at the time, this feeling of not caring. There's no point to this. It doesn't matter. Whatever. I'll just figure this out. Or it'll go away eventually, hopefully. Well, fast forward a couple of years, it was basically 15 to 17 that I started abusing drugs on a daily basis. And that was not a solution, right? It was a piss poor solution to the actual problem, but it was not a legitimate solution that had good results. I would say that the drugs worked, quote unquote, for those listening on audio eventually. I got my air quotes up. I would say it worked for a couple months. And that's what people don't understand about drugs. People that use drugs don't do it because it doesn't work. That would be stupid, right? You do it because it did work at some point. It did make you feel better. It did help you in the moment for what you were dealing with. But it's like, it's the devil in a very almost literal sense. It says, I'll give you what you want right now, but the trade-off is I'm going to create new problems for you if you keep doing this. That's the devil, man. And so the drugs keep stacking on. Very stereotypical story of drug use. Harder and harder things get added on. I now need money because I can't afford it. So I chose to start selling drugs. That was my bright idea. And of all things, Sarah, what happened at 17 that really, looking back, is kind of fascinating that it took this route. It was trying to stop the drugs that led to some of the biggest issues. Because I am taking this approach this entire time for 12 years that I am the problem. I kept remembering at 5 years old, doctor couldn't figure it out. Doctor's smart. I must be the problem. And I think a lot of adults go through this, right? They're unintentionally, almost always unintentionally, kind of gaslit by the medical society, making them feel like nothing's wrong. So that's not a hit at Western medicine. I know that most people don't become doctors to gaslight people. In fact, you're doing it most likely because you want to help people and you have a good heart and you wouldn't work the hours that you did and take on the debt you did in medical school if you didn't kind of give a damn. Obviously, you do. So this is just me saying my experience. I'm not blaming any one person or profession. So that gaslighting, though, led to this idea that it is me. I can't talk about this stuff. Well, that means when I'm trying to stop the drug abuse too, I also can't talk about that. I had this whole, it always makes sense to you when you're on drugs. I had this whole plan that I got to stop before the age of 18 because there has to be someone watching me right now that knows I'm selling drugs and they're going to wait until I'm 18 so they can charge me as an adult. It's embarrassing to admit these things now. I know there's crazier thoughts out there, but this paranoia was real. I absolutely believed someone was waiting for me to turn 18 so they could catch me then so they could put me in jail. So I said, I'm going to outsmart them. I'm going to stop. Well, I didn't get help for that drug withdrawal that I was about to go through. I didn't really understand drug withdrawal. That's what led to the real trouble. And I know I was on a bad route anyway, don't get me wrong, but that led to trouble faster. I got into a very serious altercation at my school that day, the literal day that I stopped trying to use these things because of the withdrawal. And that altercation had consequences. I was arrested that day. I got put into juvie and I spent my 18th birthday on house arrest as a result of this. Now, the problem was all of those situations are, of course, highly stressful. Well, I've only taught myself one coping mechanism for stress. It was only a matter of time before I went back to that coping mechanism, drugs. I start doing the same stuff I was doing before, except now on probation or even house arrest because I have people dropping the stuff off at 3 a.m. to the end of my parents' driveway because I'm that desperate to get high. And I always like to disclaim this. This is not just me being nice. My parents are some of the best people you could ask for to have as parents. They are not unaware people. If someone wants to use drugs, they're going to find a way to use drugs. And it's pretty shocking to a parent to find out that this kid was sneaking out at 3 a.m. to the end of the driveway to have these things done. That's not what you're thinking is going on. So the probation thing, I get away with this for a couple of months, actively using drugs on probation. But you're not going to get away with that forever. And the real big aha moment came on, of all nights, New Year's Eve of 2013. The probation officer and my parents thought I was doing well. One of the issues with probation is you're being monitored. So it's really easy to do well when you're being monitored. And of course, I wasn't actually doing well, but it's really easy to do it when you're getting urine tested or whatever. So their whole thing was, okay, you are doing well. You can maybe do certain things again, and we'll kind of, I hate to sound like this because it makes me sound like an animal, but it's almost like rehabilitate you back into society so you can go live a normal life and be productive, but also not do these things once you're out of our control and monitoring. So on New Year's Eve, I was actually allowed to go out, but they weren't born yesterday. They're not stupid. So the rule was, okay, you can see your friends, but you're going to get dropped off by your parents. It's only going to be for 4 or 5 hours. And then your parents have to pick you back up at 12 a.m. when they're going home from the party that they're going to. My parents aren't drinkers, so they were just hanging out. I made it 10 minutes into that New Year's Eve that night, and I was drinking and doing drugs. I couldn't resist. And I promise I'm not this stupid. I couldn't resist. It's all I knew. Well, we get picked up at 12 a.m. just like we're supposed to. I haven't said we yet. We is myself and my girlfriend of about 4 or 5 years at the time. Now, I loved this girl. I thought I was going to marry her one day. I just didn't always treat her like that when I was using the drugs. And so I convinced her to do a lot of the same things I did that night. She didn't do that stuff. When we got into the car with my parents, we drove maybe a minute or two down the road, and they knew something was wrong with her. She was normally the most quiet, introverted person you can imagine. And she had, well, she wasn't introverted that night. I'll put it that way. She had a story to tell, and that alone made it obvious something was wrong with her. My parents flipped out. They were the most mad I have ever seen them in my life, to the point that they stopped the car in the middle of the road, turn around, and start screaming at her. And I'm waiting for my turn with this, and when they're going to get pissed off at me and scream at me, and they never did it that night. And I don't know if they really couldn't believe this, or maybe their brains didn't want them to believe this. They didn't think I was on anything. They thought it was her. And perhaps some of the reason is because they raised me better than this. They couldn't even comprehend that I'd be so stupid as to get into their car on New Year's Eve drunk and high on probation. And I think that's actually how I got away with a lot of this stuff. It was so dumb that no one assumed I was doing it, right? Like, who does that on house arrest? That's crazy. Perfect time to do it. Well, my girlfriend didn't say much back. She didn't argue at all, actually, from my memory. And we continued driving home once they're done yelling. Awkward, angry parent silence. We all know that. We get home, and my girlfriend and I end up by ourselves. And I had one of two choices that night. And the first one was the correct one. It was where I admit to all the stuff I had done. And just, I was thinking in the car, I was starting to think like really almost positive in a certain way, because I was having these realizations. I'm like, dude, you love this girl. Dude, she's had your back through some of the worst stuff in your life. Why the hell is she getting picked up at 12 a.m.? She should be having fun. You're the one making her get picked up, and she still has your back through all of this. Have you ever thanked her for that? Instead of choosing that first option, though, I was so ashamed. I wasn't someone who talked about my emotions, and not to mention I'm still on drugs. And so I chose to blame her for getting caught for the thing I made her do. I had a PhD in blaming other people. I always say that. I have no degree other than PhD in blaming other people at the time. I said things to her you don't say to people, man, let alone someone that you love. Thankfully, nothing physical. Not that that necessarily makes it much better, but I'm not capable of that, apparently. And when I woke up in the morning, she had already left. Now, that wasn't like her. That was kind of weird. And so I realized, sober now, all the things that happened the night before. And I start to think about all the good things that I wanted to say. And I realized you better go say those things pretty quick, because there might not be another one of these times. Well, I was right. I was just a little bit too late. So I call her. It rings a bunch of times. It goes to voicemail. Call her again. Rings a bunch of times. Goes to voicemail. And don't worry, this isn't as tragic as it's setting up to be. So I want to disclaim that. But I realized after about the 10th call, this wasn't like the other fights. She was telling me that day, I can't be in your life anymore because now you're hurting me. I already knew you were messed up, man. You think I didn't know that? You think this is a secret? Like, to me, it was a secret. To her, it wasn't. She's waiting for me to get some help, and she wanted me to know through her presence that she had my back through all of it. I just didn't see that at the time. So, Sarah, to summarize this, and I'm sorry because it's the longest-winded answer I'll give, I promise. What happened that night, I don't know if it was, or that morning rather, I don't know if it was that pain stacked on to everything else, or just the pain of the high school sweetheart, because that kills a lot of us, right? If we've ever dealt with that. That snapped me out of it. I was in this funk for several years where I could only think 10 minutes ahead instead of 10 years ahead. And some people just call that being a teenager, and fair enough. But it's even worse when you're a teenager also using drugs. Like, you literally only see 10 minutes ahead. And when I saw 10 years, which funny enough is now like almost to the day, that in 2 months it'll be 10 years. I realized, okay, this isn't working. Like, Ev, you can't just keep doing the same things over and over again. This is getting worse. It's not getting better. And that girl saved my life. It doesn't end with the story of we got back together and everything's happily ever after. It's not like that, but she did save my life. because that gave me enough self-awareness to go take the right actions, get to the counseling, try stuff in Western medicine. I didn't know any better at the time. I went to Western medicine first. Didn't work for me. Not against it, just didn't work for me. And it also led to these unique solutions that we'll talk about today with the holistic health stuff. So I quite literally owe my life to this person because I was on a terrible trajectory before it. And at the best case, I would have been in jail. There was no way I wouldn't have gotten caught doing what I was doing eventually. Worst case, I wouldn't be doing this podcast with you today. So I'm extremely thankful for that, despite all the pain that it caused. But that's what happened at 17 and 18 years old. It was a wake-up call. It's a pivotal point in my life. I think we all have those things that life was this way before this event and life was this way after those events. The older you get, I'm starting to realize the more of those you accumulate. But that is probably one of the most significant and profound ones I've ever had, other than, and I guess you don't mind saying this here because you already shared your beliefs, other than my relationship with Christ. There is nothing else that is stronger than that before and after.
I have the chills all over my body. What you've just opened a whole can of worms. The fact that when you were growing up and I was growing up, anxiety, depression, suicide, you maybe knew one person. It wasn't something that was talked about. Nowadays, it's like anxiety is the buzzword. Oh God, I've got anxiety over the test I have to take tomorrow. And so there's this misnomer of what is true anxiety? What is a true panic attack? What is true depression? So real quick, will you go through what are the diagnostic symptoms a parent or a child should look for with panic attacks or anxiety?
Okay. And obviously, for those that don't know, and I still appreciate the question, I'm going to answer it, but I'm not a psychologist, not a counselor. I don't have any formal credentials. So there is a chance that what I answer could be at least minorly inaccurate. I'm also in the space. It's not that I haven't researched these things or don't have friends that are PhDs in this stuff. So I'm more aware than the average person. So I think I can answer it overall accurately. One of the biggest things that I would look for, and especially in regards to depression, because people don't realize that suicide is now the second leading cause of death in America from ages 10 to 35. But more importantly, this the number one cause of suicide is untreated depression. Now, whether you're into Western or functional medicine, I don't really care for a second. That's a treatable condition, man. Like there's a lot to do for that. And you'll notice I even said untreated depression is the number one cause of suicide. And that's the second leading cause of death for 10 to 35. And that's a wild statistic. Yeah. So I want to focus on depression, if nothing else. What can we look for with that? It's the classic stuff sometimes that you'd think about, but then there's some hidden ones. The classic stuff is the withdrawal, right? Hey, this was a person who was enjoying all of these things at one point, or could at least put up with life, right? Maybe they didn't love school, but they showed up, whatever. And now all of a sudden there's that withdrawal. I think a lot of people interpret depression as sadness. And quite frankly, it can be. I think this very much depends on the person. I don't hear enough people describing it as what it was for me and many others. It was numb. I didn't really sit around crying all day. That happened occasionally, but that was really rare. It was a numbness. And so numb is different than sad, because sad implies you're feeling something negative all the time. Numb means something bad happens, something good happens, And there's a disturbing mental place that you get to with numbness as well. It was also anger. I've always been someone that maybe had to work on that. You know, my family, as good as we all are and as great as we get along, that was one of our things, right? Everyone is super extroverted. We're very loud. We might as well be Italian despite no Italian descent. We're like yelling and screaming, and then we love each other. And so, yes, that was present from things I learned as a kid, but that also came from something deeper. That was the depression. And I really acted out with that kind of stuff. I became physically violent. So that's something to look out for, especially in men. It's less likely that a young woman would do that, but it can happen. So those things check out for, and man, watch for the grades. And you'll notice a theme with these things. All of these things are actually stuff that would normally require disciplinary action. And I'm not saying let people get it, other than the withdrawal, I suppose, unless it led to failing grades. I'm not saying don't discipline kids for doing bad stuff. But I was just speaking about this yesterday, actually. I was telling these teachers that I was talking to, we have to ask a couple more questions. We want to dig a little bit deeper into the conversation. And quite frankly, there are going to be some kids that are just acting like idiots in school. They have too much sugar and they felt like raising hell that day, and that's what they did. But if you start to see a kid as a parent, teacher, whatever it might be, and you realize, wow, this kid's almost completely different when we're talking one-on-one than they kind of are in their group settings or whatever it might be, maybe something else is going on here. And I'll give a brief list for the panic attack thing, because I think I want to say this right. the panic attack term gets overused now. Now it's so widespread that, I mean, yes, plenty of people still don't know what it is, but especially the youth, they'll use this all the time. I'm having a panic attack. I am not underplaying one's anxiety. A panic attack is a specific condition, though. And I actually think it's wrong for both the person describing it inaccurately to say that they have that, because that might not be what they have. And it's also wrong for people who deal with this, because they're going to get kind of undermined. So a panic attack, one of the characteristics is a fear of impending doom. That's a literal symptom that will come up if you research this on WebMD, Healthline, or whatever. Fear of impending doom means you feel like something awful is about to happen. Usually you feel like you're going to die. Those panic attacks convinced me 100% that I was about to die every single time they happen, no matter how many times they happen. So you think you can rationale yourself out of this at a certain point. I mean, maybe it's just because I was young. It didn't work for me. Every day it would happen, and every day I was convinced it was the one that was going to kill me. The other thing is, too, people can get this disassociation feeling. I actually didn't get that. That wasn't one of the symptoms that I got, but they can feel almost like they're not there. And I would imagine that's some sort of coping mechanism. Your hands are going to be beyond sweaty. They're pouring, right? Your heart is pounding through your chest. It can feel like a heart attack. You can also get these sensations that you can't breathe, as if your chest is closing in on itself, or you can't swallow, as if your throat's closing in on itself. That's a panic attack, man. It's really severe symptoms. So someone could have anxiety and not have a panic attack, but we need to really make sure that we're saying these things accurately. And it's why I encourage, please, I'm not a doctor, go make sure that you double check with this stuff, because we're not serving anyone if we don't have the accurate labels for these things, because a panic attack does get addressed differently than generalized anxiety disorder. Both are serious, both get treated differently though.
I want to touch on the depression, because I really focus a lot, as people know, on thyroid health. And a lot of doctors, when they're diagnosing someone with depression, a lot of times it's because of a hypothyroid situation or suboptimal thyroid. And so I just wanted to put that in there right now, because if you are going to your doctor to get diagnosed for depression, make sure you are asking for a full thyroid panel, not just TSH. You need a full thyroid panel. TSH is a pituitary hormone. It doesn't tell you anything. You got to get the full thyroid panel. So make sure that you do that. And I just wanted to touch on that. So the panic attack, that's really interesting, that you think you're going to die. Mm-hmm. So is it always that you think you're going to die, or you think that something horrible is going to happen?
I would imagine, based on the fact that, like, I've seen it listed as fear of impending doom. I mean, that suggests that it'd be at least a little bit different for everyone. So perhaps you just get this feeling something bad's going to happen. That's not necessarily death. For me, it was always that. Never an exception, other than if I don't do something, I'm going to die. And obviously we know more about this now. There's the whole fight, freeze, fawn response. It was flight and fright back then, or whatever. It's hard to go through all of those live, right? I was a flight person for sure. And so I would always have to get up and go. I'd be running up the stairs, pacing back and forth. I had to get the energy out. But what's interesting is I've heard some people, I guess based on their genetics, what they display when they're dealing with a panic attack, if they deal with one, they actually they curl up. They don't move at all. And I can't even imagine that. So that just shows how different it could be for someone, because that is the last thing I would be able to do. I could be in a car and I would have to be bouncing back and forth, or like, let me out of this thing, with the fight or flight stuff that I got with the what do you call it, with the panic attacks. So I don't know if it's always, hey, I'm going to die for everyone, but the label is fear of impending doom. And I don't think any of us want that.
Well, and you said some words that hit home, and I've got loved ones that have used the word numb before. I'm just totally numb. And when something good happens, there's no response. When something bad happens, same thing. And then I know of someone who does just freeze up and cannot move with an anxiety attack. So all of the things you're saying, as I'm going through the Rolodex of my loved ones in my life, these terms are occurring. So why, Evan, what mental health, why is it really getting worse? Are we just getting better at diagnosing it? What is going on?
And it's so funny, because to most people out there, anyone nowadays, you could ask, is it going up? Everyone would say yes. it's not that easy to prove because in Western medicine, we are getting better at diagnosing things. No doubt. No doubt we have better screenings for cancer and autoimmune disease than ever before. That is true. So the whole question becomes, is it actually going up or did we not notice it before? The biggest argument, or the best argument, I should say, that I have for this is the suicide rates. And I'm still willing to acknowledge anyone that's into science would have heard this before. Correlation is not causation. But the thing I'm going to reference happened before the pandemic to prove to you that at least the suicide rates were going up. That's for sure. So from 1999 to 2016, the suicide rates in every single state in this country of America went up significantly. The average was like around 25 to 30%. There was only one state where it went down. It was Nevada, of all places, by a whopping 1% decrease. The highest, to put this in perspective, was North Dakota with a 57% increase in less than 20 years in suicides. Now, the reason I mention this, again, acknowledging correlation is not causation. I'm just saying this is the best argument that I have. If the number one cause of suicide is untreated depression, and untreated depression typically happens because people do feel stigmatized or they don't know what's going on, well, then we can ask a couple of questions. From 1999 to 2016, did we become more or less open to mental health in this country? I think we all know the answer is we became more open. So that implies that more people with depression should be getting treated. And so that's kind of a strong case for this, in my opinion, because it's like one thing if it just went up by 5% around the country, that'd be tragic, but it wouldn't be a good argument. When we're seeing 25, 30% increases countrywide, I do believe something's going on. Then the obvious question, like you said, kind of you started with this, what's going on? Because if this was happening even before the pandemic and the pandemic is just like, my gosh, it's the knockout punch after getting jabbed and hooked a bunch of times. It is the knockout punch. What is going on? It's the modern lifestyles. And that's no secret to anyone listening to this. So some of the stuff that I have found to be the most relevant to the people that are dealing with this kind of stuff, I do believe light is one of the most involved things. And this was already being discovered back in the 1970s, which is fascinating. There was a doctor named Dr. John Ott, and he owned the Environmental Health and Light Research Institute. By the way, he lived to 90, despite being born at a time when the life expectancy was 50. So take that as you will. He took a group of kids in Sarasota, Florida. So there was 4 windowless classrooms. And my first question always is, why the hell would you have a windowless classroom in Sarasota, Florida, of all places? That alone should be criminal. But nonetheless, there was 4 windowless classrooms. It's 1973 when this occurred. And all classes had the same white fluorescent tubes. Now, he had been studying light for years with plants, and he wanted to see its effect on humans. He had already seen some stuff happen with him anecdotally. He wanted to get some data. So what he did is he put 2 of the classrooms, he left them with the white fluorescence, changed nothing. And then 2 of the classrooms got full spectrum bulbs with radiation shielding around them. Now, for those that don't know, full spectrum is more like it's trying to mimic daylight. We cannot do that. That would be playing God. I don't know if our science is ever going to be able to mimic the sun. So we are way far from the sun, to be clear, but we are certainly closer than a white fluorescent. And what happened in a month of him changing these things out is that the people who had the full spectrum bulbs with the radiation shielding, those kids started behaving better. There was less falling asleep in class. There was less irritability. There was less outbursts, to the point that one class had no outbursts anymore. And probably the most interesting thing, because you could say all of that's subjective. Here's what's not subjective. The letter grades went up by a full letter in one of those things. And you say, well, okay, well, maybe the teachers were focusing differently because they knew it was going to happen. Okay, here's what you can't fake. And I know this isn't mental health related, but it will prove to you that this actually had an effect physiologically. These other doctors heard about what Dr. John Ott was doing, and they got on board and, were starting to conduct their own studies. Dentists started looking at this. They ran the study for 3 months, and they found after the 3-month mark, the kids that were exposed to the full spectrum bulbs all day at school versus the white fluorescence developed 1/3 the amount of new cavities that the ones under the white fluorescence developed. And you're like, what? I thought that was Hershey bars and Coca-Cola and stuff. I mean, and don't get me wrong, this is above my pay grade like 10 times. But it's like, wow, what is this doing to our bodies that we don't fully understand? It's really fascinating stuff. So that's one of the biggest things. Kids that stay up past 12 a.m., so kids being 18 and under, are 42% more likely to be diagnosed with depression. Now, I guess you can't correlate that directly with light, because correlation is not causation. But at the same time, one has to ask, why do you stay up past 12 a.m.? Are you just sitting in the dark by yourself, or do you do it because you have an artificial light stimulating you? I think there's something there. 42% is a hell of an increase. There's
Mhm.
also studies showing that people that are exposed to even a minor amount of light at night, it was actually around like 5 to 10 lux. So uh, 10 lux would be like looking at a candle from about a foot away. So 5 to 10 lux could also be having a street light come in behind the curtains, having the bathroom light on in the background, or gosh forbid, having the TV on and you're way past 10 lux at that point. And this is very normal now in today's world, or falling asleep with the phone on, you're watching YouTube, Netflix is on, whatever it might be. People that slept just with the 5 to 10 lux had noticeably more depressive symptoms than those who slept in total darkness. And we have people sleeping in insane amounts of light now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of crazy. And again, just to prove the point further with the physical health side, you guys have to look this up, as you will not believe me if I say this to you. I don't expect you to believe me. Look it up and research it yourself. It's right on, I forget if this one's actually PubMed. I should know that off the top of my hand. But these are scientific articles. This is not hippiescience.org, right, where the theory. People that are exposed to artificial blue light at night while they're sleeping, men are 1.5 times more likely to develop prostate cancer. Women are 1.5 times more likely to develop breast cancer. Those are two of the most common cancers. How is this not news? Why is this not the first thing that you're seeing today? Instead, we're still kind of going on the COVID thing, which is important and it is a strong thing. But 1.5 time risks?
Yeah.
Wow. Holy cow. I just can't understand that. So I'll pause for a second because I don't want to just keep going off. But one of the first things to answer your question about what the hell's going on, we changed our light, and I don't think we have any idea what we did when we chose to do that.
So a few things I want to just touch on. This last weekend, I went to a football game to go see my daughter at college, and super fun. I didn't drink. I didn't eat non-organic food. I did everything I normally do. So food, diet, exercise, all the same, right? Okay, so I came home. I went to bed at midnight. Normally go to bed at around 8 o'clock. Yes, I know I go to bed early, but I also normally get up at about 5 o'clock because my dog says it's time to wake up. Well, this morning, she actually let me sleep into 6 a.m. So I got 6 hours of sleep instead of my 8 hours of sleep. I felt more hungover than I ever felt in college. And I never drank, did anything, whatever, that night. My body was inflamed. I literally was functioning at 50% that whole day. And that next night, I literally put myself to bed at 7:30 and I made sure I slept until 5:30 and got more than enough sleep.
Nice.
I woke up on Monday morning. I felt back to myself and felt great. Sleep, sleep, sleep. And when you've got that cell phone by your bed, or you've got it in the bathroom and, oh, I have to go pee real quick. I'm going to check to see if I got any texts or what's happening on Instagram. That stimulus is completely wreaking havoc in the body. And we haven't even gotten the updates on the cell phones on what the risks are has not been updated since 1996. I want all of you to go back to think about what your cell phone looked like in 1996. Mine was this big. It was a Motorola. iPhone didn't exist. Now we've got these handheld computers with 5G that we're walking around that are part of our appendage now. And what you're saying, as far as we've changed our lifestyle. I mean, my one daughter who's 17 has chosen not to be on social media because she has seen what it's doing to the mental health of all of her friends. And I'm also, in reference to the light, all three of my kids chose a sport, rowing, which is outside. They're on the water. They're in nature for at least 3 to 4 hours a day. And during COVID, that was the biggest blessing in the entire world because they were not in gyms. They were not stuck at home for the afternoon. They actually got to go do something physical in nature with light. And so they're, as much as they actually suffered, because a lot of other things were happening, that was one of the saving graces to help give them a balance of some sort of mental stability.
Sure.
So I can't believe it. We only have 10 minutes left, Evan.
I can talk, baby. I'm sorry.
I know, it's fantastic. So what are the primary causes? We talked about light. social media, anything else that you want to touch on for
Yeah.
this mental health epidemic?
Yeah. And, I mean, my gosh, with what you've probably talked about on the show and the people you've had on, you don't want to sound like a broken record. But my point is, if you hear what I'm about to say and you're like, oh, I've heard this before, well, maybe you should go do it then, because it's like that important. The food thing, man, the leaky gut thing to me, 10 years ago, you said this, it was like borderline conspiracy theory to say leaky gut. And what was fascinating yesterday, Sarah, so the two groups of teachers I spoke to is like maybe 60 in the first presentation and maybe 40 in the next. I asked everyone to raise their hands, not if they knew what it was, just had they heard the term. 90% of the rooms had heard the term leaky gut. These are teachers, they're not medical professionals. And so the average person actually has heard about this now. And the reason this is relevant to mental health, it's two things really. One, the simple one. If you can't digest the food that you're eating properly, these are the building blocks to build the neurotransmitters. And so this is like 101 stuff. This is not overly complicated. You need protein to break down into amino acids, and then the amino acids can convert into neurotransmitters through all the wonderful things that happen in the body. It is so profound, in fact, that neurotransmitters are still used as supplements for rapid changes in mental health stuff. And not to mention the drugs that they use, such as Xanax or an SSRI. If you actually break down what those are all things that are playing on neurotransmitters. Now, that narrative has also been challenged over the last several years. So I said there was two parts to the leaky gut thing. I don't think we're wrong that a neurotransmitter theory or hypothesis is not a part of this. I just think it's incomplete. I think the other thing that happens with leaky gut is not only can you not break down the food, right? And just to give an analogy to people, because analogies help them remember it, right? This would almost be the equivalent of, you have your gas tank, your car, and halfway up, there's a hole in it. So you put in $50 worth of gas, or probably 70, 80 nowadays, but you only got 25. And so imagine that you actually start eating right and you try to eat enough protein, which, by the way, no teenagers are doing anyway, unless they're an athlete and being told to by their coach or their parents. You're not even eating enough to begin with. And then you're not digesting enough to actually make something meaningful with it. So it's quite scary. But the other part is that inflammatory aspect. And this was one of the coolest studies I ever found, Sarah. It was a meta-analysis that was done to try to prove that things like NSAIDs, so for those that don't know, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, that would be your naproxenes, that would be your Advils, those would fall under that category. And the meta-analysis showed in 26 out of the 30 studies that they looked at, that Advil and these other anti-inflammatory drugs had temporary use for mental health issues, as in it temporarily relieved the symptoms of anxiety and depression. And again, I really try to play devil's advocate with stuff. So someone might take that at face value. You can't do that in science. The first thing you have to do is say, well, wait a second. What if it's an unknown side effect of Advil? What if Advil, for whatever reason, actually increases serotonin? I know that sounds very unrealistic, and I do believe it's unrealistic, but you have to look at that and always challenge yourself, because correlation is not causation. Well, these guys were smart. They ran this study. They also looked at omega-3s, so supplementing with omega-3s, and they also looked at turmeric, specifically curcumin, the active ingredient in it. Well, I'm not buying that it's just a side effect now that we don't know of about Advil. Those are known anti-inflammatory agents, and they relieved the symptoms of mental health issues for people. Is that going to work the same way for everyone? No, that's why this stuff's so damn complicated. But the leaky gut thing to me comes down to this. We have a malabsorption issue. We're very literally not getting enough nutrients. And number two, when your gut is leaky, it causes systemic inflammation, including neuroinflammation. So some people are going to be predisposed to the mental health issues because those genes will load the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. Plenty of people will get plenty inflamed in their life, and they will never have a bad mood that's like actually going to meet a diagnostic criteria. I think that's less than not. But we've all seen that person that is maybe dealing with a really serious diagnosis, and they're the most positive person in the room. We all know that person because they stand out. Maybe that's just not in their genetics, man. Like maybe they just don't get that way. But for a lot of us, we do feel that way. So if you can just focus on getting the light right, researching that, getting the food right, and working on the gut stuff, I mean, man, you'll be so far ahead. We can get into some complicated things, but start with that and then add the other stuff on, because the other stuff's really useful. But you got to start with some foundational things too.
I love that you talked about leaky gut, because this is a huge passion of mine, is that the processed foods, 67% of kids' dietary intake is not real food. It's processed foods, and it causes leaky gut. And what you just said, you touched on it, is say you eat that corn dog at the game, right? And that processed foods causes leaky gut. But then the next morning you go, okay, I'm going to do what Sara and Evan say. I'm going to eat whole food. Well, you've ripped up your gut. So you're not even absorbing the good nutrients from the real food you're eating the next day unless you've repaired your leaky gut. So I'm going to just touch on a couple supplements to hit home to get that basic foundation. And that is the leaky gut bundle. You've got the Mega Spore Biotic, the Mega Pre, and the Mega Mucosa. It feeds the right gut bacteria to help produce the serotonin, GABA, dopamine, the good neurotransmitters, heal that leaky gut much more quickly so that you're absorbing the nutrients from the good protein that you hopefully are going to start filling in. We're not talking about paleo or keto or vegan or whatever. Just eat real whole food. Let's start with that. Get rid of the sodas. Let's start with if you need to switch to a different caffeinated drink away from the Monster drink and the Coke, go for coffee, go for an iced tea. There's a step down, right? I'm okay with caffeine a little bit, but for you teenagers, do remember that caffeine might make you shorter. So that's just something to think about. So the leaky gut bundle is one place to start, and you can add in what's called the Zen Biome. This is actually a spore biotic that is specific for that gut-brain access and helps with the psychosis or the psychological anxiety or depression that is this feedback loop between the gut and the brain, specifically for mental health issues. Zen Biome. I take it daily. I have everyone in my family on it. And they're all on the leaky gut bundle because we're being bombarded by all these toxins that we don't even know about in our food supply, in our water, in our environment, and our gut is being attacked. And so that is a great place to start. And the Acceleradine iodine. Kids need this more than ever. Iodine is known as the number one spiritual element or mineral in the world. It helps with brain fog, depression. Depression is the number one predictor for depression is iodine deficiency, and over 96% of the United States is deficient in iodine. So it is a great place to start. Will also help with IQ and with thyroid health, which we mentioned in the middle of the show, that a lot of times depression and anxiety are caused by thyroid issues. So that's something to think about as well. And lastly is the Cogniblast. And this is my brain supplement. It has gotten kids off of ADHD medication. I've got family members who have said, Sara, this is so amazing compared to the Ritalin that I used to take. I don't have the side effects and I actually am focused. And then I've got people on it for Alzheimer's and dementia, but I've also have people that are getting off of their antidepressants because of this, with the guidance of their doctor, of course, but they've been on antidepressants for over 20 years, never thought they could, break that relationship with their drug that they are holding on to so tightly, and they're getting off of their medication with the Cogniblast. So I wanted to mention those before we go. And Evan, do you have any last thoughts? And please tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, so I can actually answer both of them in one. I like to think of podcasts, and I say this even on my own. I like to think of podcasts as TV shows, right? You don't watch or just listen to one. You get these different perspectives, and I'm sure there's things, if Sara and I talked enough, we probably don't agree on, and that's good. We need intelligent thought and respectful people because we're both respectful to each other, continuing to enhance this conversation. So the podcast I do for Functional Diagnostic Nutrition is called the Health Detective Podcast, and that would be a podcast you'd listen to. It is educational, and people like Sara have been on, but to me, I focus on the stories there. So, if you're wanting like an inspirational thing that day, that could be where it's really useful. And the reason I'm saying that answers both questions is because you're saying like, oh, well, is there something else they need to know? I need you to know that there's hope. And the proof of that is those stories. That's one of the reasons that I decided to format the podcast in such a way, is because, some people, Sara, they love the science like us and they really get it. And then others, man, it's just that doesn't resonate. Even if they're totally smart people, it just doesn't resonate for some reason. But when they hear about someone that had cancer, that had an autoimmune condition, that had these mental health issues and came out on the other side, you might not fully understand what they did. You might not be able to recite it, but hearing that, allows you to hang on, because I genuinely believe that one of the biggest things that's happening with suicide, it's not that we're in so much pain, it's that we are in pain and we perceive that it's never going to end, and that's when a human being kind of gives up. So when you can hear the hope or feel the hope, that's when you can kind of go through stuff. I mean, we're tough species, man. We didn't get here by doing nothing. We're a resilient species, but we got to have that hope. So check that out. fdntraining.com/accelerated health if you'd like to learn more about the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition program. So it's kind of a way that you might be able to do work like Sara and I do. It's a blessing, man. I shouldn't even call it work. That's probably inaccurate, right? I think there's just, you know, by definition, it's work, but it doesn't feel that way. So fdntraining.com/accelerated health, FDN training on Instagram. That's really all that you need to know in terms of finding us. Thank you for allowing us to chat it out.
Thank you, Evan. And definitely check out that link. I offer affiliate programs and wholesale programs for a lot of FDN training coaches. So it's definitely an opportunity. If you have a story to tell, and if you've had deep experiences that have been so dark, but now you have the light and you want to share, that is a great opportunity. I know so many of you are wanting to help other people. So anyway, thank you, Evan. And thank you for joining us today, everybody. If I can help you with your health issues, contact me directly through the website, sarabantahealth.com. Join the free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health. There's no downside. And you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Accelerated Health Products, across over 100 channels under Accelerated Health TV and radio show. And like I mentioned, for Evan and I, our goal is to reach everyone on earth with eyes to see and ears to hear our messages of healing. So help us with that goal. Share this podcast with a few of your friends. So many need to see this episode. Thanks again and have a great week.